Hello, welcome to the August 23rd, 2024 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo, and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you are watching the live, if you are on the live stream, how it usually works, how it works is you can submit questions in the chat field, or if you want to send questions in advance, you could send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And we will go through all the questions chronologically as they are asked. If you don't see an immediate response to your question, if we could avoid repeating the same questions over and over again, that would be appreciated. Just kind of slows down the whole process, and we'll go through all the questions chronologically. And we should have an index of all the topics covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field shortly after the live stream ends. So I'll take a dinner break and it'll take a couple hours to go through the live stream again. But you could look for that, and if you want, so that will be pinned to the top of the comments field and with timestamps. And if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and Jan from Stockholm's created that site. And you could just kind of do a search and find particular questions. I also have a PDF document that if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, that I'm happy to share. We also want to give special thanks to two people that serve as moderators. So we have Agent K and Jazz Dude. So they're not Steinberg employees. They just really want to make it a better forum or better live stream experience. So we appreciate all their efforts. We also will give a special kudos to Jazz Dude for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. And with that, that's a wonderful resource of information with links to articles and different tutorials that is of benefit to the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America. I primarily focus on Steinberg products, and I'm going to be the host today. And if you are watching live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And it's always great to see people from all over the world. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, wonderful to see Yassian on. It says, question, possible to add vocals with a drum editor with more VST MIDI? So I assumed that this is maybe adding more voices, and Yassian had sent a screenshot to me by email at clubcubase@steinberg.de. So I think I may understand what he's kind of trying to do. So let's say if we have our drum editor here, we could see that there are other voices that are available, but there are a couple of different visibility modes. So if you click on this icon here, now we could choose to, so once we open this up, we can see all of the 128 MIDI notes in this particular voice. But if we click on the pitch visibility tab, we could choose to have this show only sounds in use by the instrument or show only sounds with events. So if you wanted to see all of the other voices, try to just simply turn off the pitch visibility. So try that and let me know if that's kind of what you're looking to accomplish with that. And once you're in this area, if you wanted to reverse the sounds, you could do that as well. So let me know if that's what you want to do, Yassian. All right, wonderful to see Michael Marshall checking in from Somerset in the UK. And we have Val checking in from Vienna, and he has a question. Is there a key I can hold while scrolling to move through the mixer window horizontally? So if we're in the standalone mixer, one thing that, you could always, if you come over here, if you have a key, you could hit the left and right arrows. That may not be as cool as you'd think. Now, one of the other methods, and this is only in this standalone mixer, is if you hover the mouse over a fader, like not over the fader, but in the meter area. And now we use the scroll wheel of your mouse. We can navigate left and right horizontally in the mixer. And you notice that as we do this, it's always going to end up where there's a fader area or the meter area. So, you could do that. You could also just grab kind of the point right here and navigate. But if you're in the standalone mixer, just place the cursor directly in the meters area and use the scroll wheel of your mouse, and then you can navigate horizontally like that. And I don't think that works in the lower zone. I'm not sure why, if there's particular reasoning, but it doesn't seem to work in the lower zone. So you might just have to grab this, but it's often less of a issue since you have kind of a smaller working area. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Val. All right, so we see Matt Elston just checking in. He says that he really appreciates the streams and thanks to everyone for making it a great place. Okay, so we have All About Music says, hi Greg, what is the difference between between envelope ADSR and amplitude ADSR in Retrologue 2? All right. See. Let's go add an instance. All right, so I think that when we do this, that the amplitude ADSR is going to be primarily for the actual waveform itself. So let's say, all right, so when we are here and we adjust kind of the amplitude, so let's say, now when I adjust my attack, but if we are here on this particular, excuse me, I'll clear my throat. So now when we are here in the envelope section, this would be more applicable for the filters. So when the filter kicks in, and if we wanted to adjust, let's say, the release of that, so let's say, so at this point, if we wanted the filters, so at that point, this is going to be kind of the envelope for the filter area here, and this would be kind of the envelope for the actual sound. So that way, if you wanted to do just kind of traditional ADSR, where we want, as soon as we release the key, we have the long release. If I wanted a short release when we release the key. And this, again, would be more for the particular, how the ADSR of the filters would work. All right. All right, great to see Jazz Dude on. We see Fly V, says he's back home in the studio in Winnipeg, Canada. We see Jan from Cubase Index on. We see Jay from Secret Studios, and his question is today a Zoom meetup or next week? So it will be next Friday. I'll probably be one of the few people in America that's working the Friday of Labor Day afternoon and evening, but we will be 1 week from today, so on the 30th. Okay, so we have Paul Grooveside asks, hi Greg and everyone, I have a project into which I'd like to insert a 32-bar section in the middle of audio and instrument tracks. Is there a quick way to do this, please? Okay, so this is where we could use the range tool. So let me just... All right, so let's say we wanted to insert a number of bars. So I'm going to grab my range tool and I'm going to hold down Control or Command plus Shift just to make this global. So let's say I want to do, and then I would select 32 bars with the range tool, and we could have that automatically snap. So we've defined our area that we want to insert silence, or basically move all this information over by, and the length that we're going to move it over is going to be set by the range. We would then go to your edit, to range, and we'll say insert silence. And now we've just basically taken our range selection and then inserted silence and moved everything else over, which would include like automation as well. So once again, grab the range tool. You could do it on just a couple of different parts. So if you wanted to come here and we go to edit to range and insert silence, so we could do it just on several parts, or if you hold down Control or Command plus the Shift key, this would globally select the range, select your 32 bars, edit, range, to insert silence. So let me know if that will work for you. Thanks for joining the live stream. Always wonderful to see Tiago checking in from Brazil. We have Martin, I believe he's from Germany, if I'm not mistaken. Great to see Jan from Cubase Index. We have Soren from Sweden on. We see John Costigan checking in from Kenosha, Wisconsin. Okay, sorry, my chat field just jumped. All right, so we have Uno Memento checking in from Finland. He's been on tour, so it's great. I hope you had a good tour and that you're enjoying your time at home. All right, and we have Stefan checking in from Sweden. And we see Secret Studios. He just says, asking if he's the only one that lost a video. So let me just check, see if it's going on my end. So yeah, it's video still on my end. So maybe if you refresh, or if someone else could see, but I have kind of a separate web tab open where I could check the video playback. All right, so we have Tim K checking in with his cat Buddy from Zeist in the Netherlands. All right, who's waving to my cat Steven and Stella, who's Mark Rabin's dog. Okay, Martin asks, Greg, I have a question about Wavelab, how multi-stereo layout and montage view works, and how to assign, sorry, just email popping over, covering, and how to assign the routing to my speakers and later on the file export. Can you show me an example, please? All right, so let's take a look. Okay, so when we want to come over here, so let's come over to our preferences, and here we could set the audio connections. So let's say for playback, so we have our main playback bus. So let's say it's going out of my mix left, mix right, and then if we wanted to add bus number 2, we could say, okay, this is going out of this output. So now we could just come over here and we could continue to kind of click on the plus sign to add our buses for our multiple tracks. When we go to our montage, we can add different stereo tracks. So I'm going to add a stereo track below. And then let's see if we, so here we could set our inputs. All right, and let me just figure out the output routing. All right, so this will be going out of our main outputs. Let me just, okay, so we click on the channel output routing. And at this point, you go to your audio connections, select bus 2, and then we could come right over here. So once you click here on the outputs, we can say the output is the left, right, and then we go to our outputs here. We could just, so again, just come over here and you could adjust the track routing. And if you need to split those, so again, this is the icon, so you could just continue to add more tracks and then do the routing at that point. And then let's say if it was going to be for like a 5.1 file or something like that, so if you needed to do that, you could also add multi-channel files. So let's say if you have interleave files, like if you're doing more immersive type work, we could just come over here. So let's just open up. I think I have a sorry, I did the wrong thing. So as soon as you have like a multi-channel interleaved here, you could, have like a 22.1 file if you wanted to, but this is basically one audio file. And then you would just define the outputs again under file preferences, and then you'll see the audio connections. And then you could change the channel configuration here for each one. So okay, wonderful to see Dallas LaRue checking in from Las Vegas. Glad to see you on. All right, so we see All About Music asks, Iconica ensemble samples are giving me max preload memory error. How can we resolve this, Greg? Okay, so probably what you need to do is we'll just jump over into, so there's a setting inside of Halion Sonic. So we'll open up Halion Sonic and we'll come over to the options tab here in the middle editing area and try just to increase. So you can see the max preload, and this is kind of a pretty conservative setting because what Halion Sonic and Halion will do is actually just preload the initial parts of the samples and stream the rest from disk. So often you could just simply increase this setting here, So if you have, like I have 64 gigs of RAM, so using 1.2 gigs of RAM, I could go a lot higher with this if needed. So Again, open up Hallian or Hallian Sonic if you go to the Options tab, and now you could adjust the max preload amount there. So try raising that, and I think that will do the trick for you. All right, so you see Val says, thanks, Greg. I didn't know I have to hover in the meter area. I kind of found that by accident in the live stream. So one of the things I've learned in live streams. All right, so wonderful to see Tim Weinheimer from Mission Viejo. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. All right, so we have a question. I think it's Majid Muhammad or Majid Muhammad. How to disable pitch and modulation wheel in my MIDI keyboard and make my control surface control them. So if you want it to filter, pitch bend. So, generally, a lot of times the controllers themselves can be filtered. If you wanted to do it in general, you could come over to preferences, and there is a MIDI filter. This will kind of work for everything. So if you say, okay, I want to come over here, I want to filter my pitch bend and my controller, and then we could say make it controller 1. So at that point we could just filter out all of those particular modulation and pitch bend, but that wouldn't be controller specific. So you could do that. There's also, if you go to the routing tab, we could go to like the track or a project input transformer. So if we open up the panel, we could say I want to activate a module. We'll say we're going to filter type is equal to pitch bend. And then we will say also type is equal to controller. And we'll say the main value or the subtype, I think, is going to equal one, and then you could filter out pitch bend and the particular MIDI CC1 from coming in, and then you could utilize those for other things. So we could just filter out those things, but when you say make my control surface control them. So, if sometimes those are parts of a MIDI controller that often break, so you could just do that. But often in MIDI controllers, you could tell it to disable transmission of those devices as well. All right, so we see Daniela, as DaVinci Girl asks, hello, Greg, I need Cubase in 9.1.6 Dolby Atmos for binaural monitoring. Source is 712, how to convert it. Can you show your setup and routing? Okay, so let's say, do new project here. So most people I know are doing kind of like 714, but let's come over here and so let's get to our audio connections. Let's see if there is. Yeah, so inside of Cubase, the max is going to be 714. So but in Nuendo, I think we get higher ones. So let's just take a quick look in Nuendo. Okay, so now we'll come over here. Let's get my buses. And as we do this, so here you could have a 914. It's not the most popular format, but here in the window you could do 914 and kind of you see kind of second question and how to convert Dolby Atmos to ambisonics order for YouTube. So what you could do here is, let me just open up kind of all right, so now I have this kind of set up for an Atmos. And if you have headphones on, you may hear the audio binaurally kind of spinning around. So as we see the panners kind of going behind. All right, so now that we have that done, I think what we want to do is we go over to our bed. So we'll go to the bed channel here. And I'm just going to route this out to my stereo audio source. All right. And as we go to inside Cubase here, let me just, I guess we opened it in the window, so sorry. But same exact concept. But we'll go to export, audio mix down, and then I'm just going to do a stereo out. So we will choose to export the audio. I'm going to and I'll just drop it onto my desktop. All right, so now when I want to take this particular file, we'll come over. And let me just route the audio output so you guys can hear it. So now this is our mix down file. And this will have the binaural panning. So what you want to do is to take the bed, send that to the stereo out, and then do an export a stereo audio mix down, and then that will create the binaural file for you. All right, we'll jump back into Cubase here. All right, so okay, so we had the Heartbreak Time Machine says, why would a track added in a mix console view be locked to track 1? How can I unlock, move this track in the mix console? Moving it in the editor does not change the position in the console. All right, so let's say if we have in this project here, so if we have 16 tracks, just going to make sure I'm not misunderstanding the question. Okay, so why would a track added in the mix console be locked to track number 1? How can I unlock, move this track? So it depends. So if I add a track here, I think it adds it below the selected track. So now if we add an audio track, you can see that audio track 17 gets added below the currently selected track. So if I have the bottom track selected and we add an audio track 17 gets added directly there. So it goes directly below the selected track. And if you made that mistake, so let's say if I'm here, we right click, we add an audio track, so we see audio 17. And if I wanted to move it, we don't move it from the mix console, but on the project window. Now you could just simply drag that track down to the bottom. All right, so we see from All About Music, who asks, for some reason my Samson Carbon 49 mod wheel is not moving the master volume. What could be the reason, Greg? Generally it should map itself by default, isn't it? So I wouldn't assume that the modulation wheel is doing master volume unless you like specifically, have mapped it for that. So let's say if we had our master volume here. Hang on one second. All right, sorry about that. So, generally moving a modulation wheel wouldn't automatically control that. So, but if you had that assigned specifically in the MIDI remote, so if I was going to make like a new MIDI remote device, all right, so let's say if I wanted to move like my mod wheel here, so I'm just going to move this. So when we go to the mapping assistant, I could take this and, map this particular parameter to anything I want. So if I want this fader to be mapped, so let's say I go to my Nectar, I could right click here and say on my master fader and pick up for MIDI remote mapping. And then we could apply the mapping, and now my modulation wheel is controlling the volume, but I wouldn't assume that that was going to be set up by default. So you may have to go into the mapping assistant if that's what you wanted to do. You could obviously do it, but I don't think it would be set up by default to do that. So I'm not sure if you had downloaded a script or if there was another script that, or if you had made a script, because I don't think the Samson actually so I'm not sure if that's where you actually had it configured or not. So but you could change that if you needed to pretty easily just by going into the mapping assistant. Okay, next. All right, so the Heartbreak Time Machine has indicated that they have smashed the like button. All right, so Tim K just says it's tough to keep up with both Greg in the chat, but I want to say he's not intentionally neglecting the social. You just want to peek over and say happy. He's just happy to see familiar names. All right, so Hanny Stablini asks, will Steinberg ever allow we delete or move tracks from the mixer and not only from the arrange window? It's really useful, thanks. So it's obviously kind of a long-standing feature request. So hopefully, we'll see what happens in the future, but, I know it's something that's, been requested for a long time, so. But currently it doesn't work, but, I'm sure that there's people that are always kind of working on new stuff. All right, Jay from Secret Studios asks, hi Greg, just checking out mid-side decoding / encoding plugins, trying to figure out if plugins featuring the MS options have self-contained MS features, and if not, what needs encode decode. So generally if you're doing kind of like an MS recording, so we could think of there's, and I think that, while they're kind of related in terminology, that they could be different concepts. And one is, so there's like MS miking, where you would take like a figure 8 mic and, duplicate the, turn it to its side, duplicate the channel, and reverse the phase. And that could really allow you to, have kind of like a stereo recording, but have control over the mono source of it. So that's, and that's generally where the encoding could come in. It's a simple process of, doing some routing, duplicate a track, and flip the phase on one of the inputs. So that's pretty easy to do. And then there's also MS, like mid-side processing. So which doesn't require an encoder, but so something like a mid-side process where we could kind of do different processing on the middle part of the panning spectrum as well as the sides. So if we were to kind of think of this as not lows, middle, highs, but center pan and left and right panning. So if we think of it like that, we can at this point come over and like in frequency we could choose whether this EQ works as a stereo EQ or if it does a mid-side. So if now we could take like this band, if I wanted to boost the mid-range in the middle part of the panning spectrum, and let's say in the sides I want it to be very bright. At this point we could adjust kind of the Q on that one particular band to do mid-side processing. But when you're recording and capturing something, that could basically do like an MS encoder decoder. So while they're kind of both working with isolating the middle part and the sides of the panning spectrum, then but there's no encoders that are really needed to do it, and there's no encoders needed for plugins that offer that. So we see All About Music says, I'm kind of a bookworm, so can you suggest some books about Cubase and music production in general? So I tend not to read them. I do have, if I wanted to come over, like on my systems, and I'm a Kindle fan for reading, so I always have books going on. And on my Kindles, I always have like documentation folder. So there, there's kind of an online help that's available as well. But if we wanted to go to like the documentation, so just going into the PDF file, this is more like a traditional manual, where you can see kind of your index and we'll kind of go through. So, like all of your options. So this is always a fantastic reference or resource. I think that the software gets updated too frequently. It's kind of a little too fast for book publishing cycles. By the time the features are written about and distributed. Like, you know, within 4 months there could be a new generation of software, so that's why you often don't see books. I haven't really read books on music production myself in a long time, and it could be just, you know, like, but I did when I was starting off and learning all sorts of new stuff. But I think, you know, I think YouTube is an incredible resource to find information. There's a lot of kind of error-prone information, but maybe if other people have specific books that they've found that's helpful, they could share. But, you know, so I tend to, you know, for Cubase operations, I tend, you know, the manual, you know, like when you go to Steinberg.help, you may see just a, you know, like almost like more of a web-based help, which could be a little more generic than the actual manual. But, you know, in DAWs, or, you know, I think probably if you did all the Cubase documentation, you know, that could be around 200 pages, especially by the time you get into the scoring and the plugins and remote control devices. So, but maybe if other people have suggestions, books that they found helpful that they could share within the chat. All right, so we see from Tiago, says, hi Greg, question, is there a way to check the use of CPU resources of a specific plugin, not the latency? So generally not the particular CPU plugin, and sometimes plugins will vary constantly. So if you have a plugin, you know, that's on a group, and then, you know, and let's say if you have a compressor on a group, and if it's not really doing anything until, you know, the second chorus when this other element is added and that's pushing the compressor, you know, the compressor could be working harder when it's actually doing compression versus when it's not doing anything. So I know some programs have it, but I'm not sure if it is like super useful, because it may not show dynamically what it's doing on each plugin constantly throughout a song. And the processing power could be fluctuating within a song. If you're doing a virtual instrument, the more voices you play, the more filters, the more modulations that you're working on a particular sound could each increase. So it's maybe not quite as simple, but there isn't, you know, you would have to kind of go to like the audio performance meter and, you know, take something on and off and kind of take a look and see how it's interacting. And it's also, does this plugin spread across different CPU cores or not in particular scenarios, like with different virtual instruments? So there's a lot of variables that, while it looks like something, it seems like something that could be simple, but the CPU resources could be fluctuating constantly throughout a project, but something like the latency is going to be consistent. All right, so we see from Minnie Hilly, how can I send two SysEx messages to a MIDI device anytime I open a project in Cubase? So, you know, SysEx messages can be just recorded as MIDI. So if you have it like on a MIDI track, so all you'd have to do is take that SysEx and just simply put it on a MIDI track. There are preferences to be aware of. By default, Cubase will filter out SysEx. So if we go to your preferences or settings and go to MIDI filter, make sure that you have, you could make sure that the SysEx isn't being filtered off, but SysEx will just show up as a MIDI message. So you could have it, you know, where it could, you know, if you have two MIDI tracks, they could each have their SysEx messages, and every time that the project loads up, so if you're doing something like a large kind of, let's say, a bulk dump from an instrument, and like everything is starting at 1 and you want a little bit of buffer time, if you go to your project setup, so let's come over here, let's get to your project setup, you hit Shift plus the letter S, and then we'll set a 1 bar. And then you could have like, you know, your SysEx dump could be data right here. So every time that you start the project, that SysEx is being sent to the particular instrument. But SysEx will just show up in normal MIDI tracks, and you could actually see it in the list editor. So I don't have any SysEx information in there, but here's where you could see all the SysEx information in the MIDI list editor. But just to have it as a MIDI event, and then you could load it into your template so that every time you start, you can just simply, you know, the SysEx messages will the SysEx messages will be sent to the device to do the recall or configurations. All right, so you see Tiago, and is just kind of asking about the CPU resources of specific plugins. Mentions he has a Jurassic 12-year-old laptop, still works fine in Cubase 13, but when I start adding plugins, it begins to suffer. So, you know, generally 12-year-old laptops, you know, they might be susceptible to higher CPU usage as plugins get more advanced and have more capability. Okay, reading through comments. All right, so you see the Heartbreak Time Machine just says follow up, dragging the track does not move it in the mix console view. All right, so let's say we have our mix console view here. I want to take MIDI 1 and drag it below audio 6. So we see that reflected here. So I want audio 1 to go below audio 11. So we can see this is audio 11 here, and I'm going to put it at between 11 and 12. So as we do this, audio 11, audio 01, audio 12, if I move this track up between 9 and 10, we can see that reflected in the mix console, and even if we go to the larger mix console too as well. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, so we see from Da Vinci Girl, who says, I normally put all or most as possible in Atmos as objects and try as less as possible to be in the bed. Does this make sense? I think everything has to eventually be in a bed. So you can have lots of objects, but they kind of need a bed to be home. All right, Jay from Secret Studios asks, hi Greg, I've seen some videos saying that orchestral tracks are pre-panned and should not be panned in DAW. Is this all orchestral libraries? If not, are there terms aside from pan for me to note? So some orchestral samples, you know, will kind of be fixed panning. So let's come over, let's take a look at, we'll load up an Iconica. Okay, so let's say if we wanted to do, generally, you know, when you're looking at the audience, like string basses will be on the right-hand side. So like the back right. So we come over here. So this is panned pretty. So it's panned pretty evenly. So if we wanted to come over here and mix this, here we could pan. So not every orchestral library, and I think, you know, while sometimes it's could be realistic to have a more traditional panning spectrum where someone can't mess it up and, you know, put the violin 1 in the back right and basses in the front left. You know, so I think that kind of makes sense, where you have the flexibility of placing the instruments wherever you want, as opposed to, you know, how instruments were kind of added into the orchestra. Some orchestras will have, you know, different seating arrangements. So, you know, I don't think it should be fixed. I think maybe it's okay if the instrument defaults to kind of a panning if you load up like a full ensemble. But I think you should always have the ability to pan, so not every orchestral instrument will allow you to do that. And as you see, Iconica Sketch gives you the freedom to pan it wherever you want. And I think that's a good approach. All right, so we see Blue Jedi. I see it's directed to Jazz Dude. Says what is the link to Iconica Sketch? So Iconica Sketch is, I know Jazz Dude has a like a template that's kind of set up, but you know, Iconica Sketch is part of your Cubase license. It's a full orchestral instrument. So if you want to go to like if you don't have it, you could go to the Steinberg download assistant. And so when we come over here to your Cubase 13 license, if you haven't downloaded it, you can just come right over here, and then you'll see the Iconica Sketch instrument. Yeah, so the Iconica Sketch is about 5 gigabytes. So you could just download it from there, and it will run off of your, run directly off of your Cubase license. All right, wonderful to see Pertti Komenen checking in from Finland. And we have Dwight Cunningham from the Bahamas. Oh, he sounds like such a good place to be. Thanks for joining us, both of you. Best Korean Jesus says, waiting for the sale, maybe September. All right, so Dwight Cunningham just says, Greg, Cubase is a very powerful DAW. I'm a radio guy, now playing music and making jingles. That's great. All right, see, Best Korean Jesus is waiting for Absolute to go on sale. So, who knows, maybe soon. All right, so Joe asks, how do I create and route the LFE channel to a 5.1 master group and listen in the control room? Thank you very much. Okay, so, so any audio track that you have, so let's come over here, and I'm just going to add audio connection, and I'm going to go to my outputs, and let's add a 5.1 output. Okay, so this particular audio track, I'm going to route it not to the stereo output, but to my 5.1 out. So now that I've done that, so when we go to our output routing, we have our 5-1 out. So if we wanted to now pan this anywhere we want, now if it's you just want this to go, you know, if you wanted to go only to the LFE instead of sending it to the 5.1 out, just choose your LFE channel here. Then this track is only going to be sent to the LFE. And all right, and you sit and listen to the control room. So once you have, so if you want to listen to that in the control room, what you would need to do is come over to your control room here. And in the control room, in your monitors, we're going to add a monitor. And we're going to make this our 5.1 monitor. So now when I come over to monitor 2, we can now come over here, and now our control room, we have a 5.1 volume knob, so we could do all of our different volume control. And if we wanted to, again, come over here, we can say, let's get to like your down mix presets. We could say, okay, I want this to be in 5.1. I want to listen to it in stereo, or 714 if you're doing Atmos. So at this point, you could and if we want to go to channels, I'll just quickly get rid of my stereo out to show this. Right, so now we go to our 5.1 and we go to our channels that you could come over here and choose to monitor directly here in your 5.1 as well. So you could turn on and off different channels. So make sure that you have your output defined. So go to your audio connections. You'll see your output and your control room. Make sure that those are both set up for 5.1. And then you'll be able to monitor and the track itself. You want it to get to the 5.1 output, and then you could choose to route to the LFE specifically if you needed to. Okay. Okay. Okay, so we see All About Music asks, Greg, how can I route Retrologue 2 effects to another piano instrument track? So if it is with, so the effects are kind of internal for Retrologue. So I'm not sure if it's like the arpeggio that you want, or like the built-in effects. So let's say if we come over here to Retrologue, and if we go to the effects area, so there is, you have, phasers, a resonator, so, a delay, a reverb. So, we have delays and reverbs already kind of built in. If it's going to be more of like an arpeggio type of scenario, so let me just kind of pop over here. So if we want to just kind of take this out, what you could do is just hit record. and then stop, and then you'll see like this little MIDI icon, and then what you could do is just simply drag that, and that would be the arpeggiator that we could drag out to particular tracks as well. So, but let me know if it's the arpeggiator that you want, because we could record it, capture it, and drag that to a piano part, or the effects. So there's a resonator, so this may not make sense on a piano, but you have phasers, delays, and reverbs. These are kind of intended to be internal, but all these plugins exist inside of Cubase already. Wonderful to see Michael Pierce on from Grand Chapel Studios. All right, so we see All About Music. It says Retrologue does not have a graphical wave presentation like Serum or Vital. Will that be included? So let's say if we have Retrologue here. So I'm not sure if it's like an oscilloscope type thing that you want. So often, or if it's like a waveform. All right, so let me just. We'll come over here and so, but also what you could do is just come over. Let's say we'll just get to our mix console here. And if you want it to go under the Analyzer plugin. But let me just. But here you could even kind of see the what the wave scope looks like. But let's come back over to. So you can use like different oscilloscopes here. And then as you would change, you could see the reflection here. So let's just say. So you already have kind of, different scopes inside of Cubase, and a lot of times you may see it also if it's kind of dealing more with samples, like Halligan, that's dealing with samples. You can see waves and waveforms for a lot of the different tools. All right, so we see Rebel. Can I use step design with Groove Agent? Sure. So if you wanted to, so let's come over here. Let's just add an instrument. All right, so let's come over here to right, so here I'll just. So, sometimes using tools, like this is often not intended for drums. People may use Beat Designer, but sometimes you may just kind of randomly do something that sounds great and is unique and gives you a different result in a quick way. So yeah, you could definitely use Step Designer with Groove Agent and come up with wonderful results. All right, so we also just see Jazz Dude just posted a link that may have reminded me of something else about how to use Retrologue as an effect. So one of the other things that we could do in Retrologue, and we'll show this quickly, if you wanted to use like the filters, you could come over here. So let's grab our instrument track. Let's open up an instance of Retrologue. Let's grab some.
I'll get your body moving for you.
Okay, so what we could do is also set up Retrologue. We could sidechain into Retrologue. So if we wanted to come here, let's sidechain our vocal channel. And as we do this, we want to make sure that we have our input. So we may have to see if I remember how to do this.
I'll get your body moving for you.
But once we have kind of the sidechain, that we can bring in the input from the sidechain. So let me just make sure that.
I'll get your body moving for you.
But you can basically sidechain and into, I think we just would drag. This is turn on, and you'd bring up the input. So let me just.
I'll get your body moving for you. I'll get your body moving for you.
So that's another approach that you could use. So if you want to run it through different oscillators, you could sidechain into Retrologue an audio source. But let me know if that's kind of. All right. Let me just check my settings in Retrologue one more time here. Yeah, so I think these other. I think all these oscillators need to be off, maybe.
I'll get your body moving for you.
But yeah, you could read up on how to do the sidechaining in.
I'll get your body moving for you.
So, just having a little brain cramp figuring. Let me just check the input now. Turn the oscillator off.
I'll get your body moving for you.
Yeah, but you do have the capability of doing that. I could show it more on Tuesday's live stream. All right, so we see Roland Stuff, who's joined us from Sussex in the UK. All right, so All About Music says, it's great to know and answers my question. Thanks a ton. All About Music says, is a 16 gigabyte RAM not enough to design really tight ostinatos, Greg? They always sound lagging. So, you know, I don't think that, you know, I don't think it would affect the timing of the ostinatos, your RAM, so if it's going to work or not. Yeah, but there's a lot of other variables that could affect the feel of some ostinatos. But I don't think it would be RAM. If it's working, then the RAM should be fine. All right, All About Music says, is it possible to achieve a professional sound using just the stock sounds plugins? Definitely. There's lots of people. You know, I think, you know, there's a lot of third-party companies that, you know, maybe don't favor Steinberg because, you know, Steinberg users don't necessarily have to use as many third-party solutions because we have such a great, you know, such a great suite of plugins. So you could definitely do everything with just stock plugins. All right, wonderful to see Nick on from Essex in the United Kingdom. Thanks for joining us. I guess it's a bank holiday coming up in the UK, so we have our kind of kickoff summer holiday next weekend in the United States, Labor Day. All right, so we see from Dr. Sumaud Al-Omar. Hi, Greg. For my desktop Dell Optiplex 7070, which has high performance, do you recommend Windows Pro 11 or 10 to work with Cubase Pro 13? Focus if newer version has future advances. So I don't think that, you know, like my personal computer for my studio, I have Windows 10. I haven't bothered updating to Windows 11. I don't think it's going to give me anything. Some people, you know, will have great Windows 11 systems. Some will have 10. But I think, you know, if you aren't running like, you know, lots of unnecessary things in your computer, you know, lots of other tasks that you could optimize both operating systems. So I haven't felt the need personally to go up to Windows 11. Lots of people are obviously running Cubase very successfully in Windows 11 as well as Windows 10. So I think either choice is a great solution. I tend to, you know, as long as I can stick to this could be just going back of years of computing. I'm not one to quickly update my operating system. So if my computer is working great, I will try to keep that, you know, and this is just a personal thing that I do just to mitigate, you know, unexpected variables. You know, if like, you know, if my Windows 10 system is working great and I can still install all the programs I need, I don't necessarily feel compelled to go out and get Windows 11. On my Mac OS, you know, I don't think that there's super compelling reasons for me to go beyond Monterey that I've seen. So with some of those different aspects, I tend personally to kind of stick to the operating system my computer came with, and that's always kind of worked well for me. So I don't think you'll see a significant advantage or disadvantage to either of the operating systems. All right, so we see from All About Music, when I press record button, the entire track becomes red and merges into any other parts in the path. Something wrong with my settings. I wanted to record at my start locator. Okay, so I'm not sure what your start locator is, but let's say if I'm here and I just hit record, it records straight from wherever I initiate record. So I don't have any MIDI notes going in. So, and if I have like my left and right locators set, so let's say if I have something like this, where it's based on my left and right locators. At that point, I could just record. I could hit the 1 key of my numeric keypad and hit record. It will record directly from there. If we wanted it to punch in at that specific point where my left and right locators are, I could hit the letter I. And as we go, it's now just going to, let me see if I have my punch in enabled. So now when I hit the letter I, we could just say, and the track that's record enabled will just punch right in. So you can also punch out right at the, right at the right locator. So it says becomes red and merges into any other parts in the path. Now you could also, so let's say if we have audio recordings that are there, there's also different record modes where you could just choose to replace. So as I punch in, now we could replace the audio instead of it overlapping. If we wanted to do like different takes, we could go to your record modes here. And if you wanted to keep history and record, and now we could have kind of like stacked recordings on the track. So, and now if we wanted to see those in lanes, we could just open up the lanes and see our multiple recordings. But if you didn't want those to be stacked, you could just, put the audio record mode into replace, and you could also do that from the transport, where you could have common audio record modes. You could set it right there from a menu. So let me know if that's helpful or if I'm misunderstanding. All right, so we see from All About Music, is there a setting to change the entire font style of Cubase to Arial? So I don't think so. I'll just take a quick look in preferences, but I don't think it's kind of defined where it's, like, I don't think they want anyone to be able to do like Wingdings fonts. So yeah, I don't think that there's settings where, I'm not sure exactly which font it's using, but I don't think it's changeable. That could be a big, huge variable for user interface. Okay, Flyv asks a question. Make sure I'm not missing any. All right, so we have Nungu60A just saying hi to everyone. Thanks for joining us. Flyv's question, what's the best way to utilize changing tempo in a song, or between 4/4, 1/8, etc.? Okay, so let's do new project here. Okay, and let's just add it. I'm going to add a signature track, and let's add a tempo track. Okay, so first thing we want to do is make sure, like, when we have the tempo, we could turn on our tempo track, and this would allow us to put in tempo. So if we want to go to the beginning of our project, we could see kind of the tempo node here, and we could select that and change our tempo and slow it down accordingly. Now, if you stretch this out a little further, you could also see where you could have it go to step or ramp. So if I'm in step mode, I can say, okay, at measure 2, I want the tempo there, I want tempo here. So we could immediately change to different values. If we have snap turned on, we hit the letter J, or turn this icon, we could say, okay, we're going to snap it to the beat. And we could have the tempo change to a specific value, like right there. We could also switch this to ramp mode. So I could say, okay, I want the tempo to go from here and to ramp down. directly to this value over time, so it does gradual tempo changes. Now our signature track is also going to be available here. So we can say, okay, I want it to be 4/4. If I click with my scissors tool or my pencil tool, we can say, okay, I want this to be 3/4. I want it to be, and I'm just going to type in 6/8. And each of these tempos we could also have. So let's say if I come here, we go to 4/4. And once we have one of the signatures selected, I could say, okay, here I want my click pattern to be like we have a typical. But let's say I want it to be, we could have different click patterns. So I could say, now I want this click pattern. And again, we could adjust the click pattern here. So if we wanted this to be more like 4 different ones. So as we, or if we want it to be this, but we could also say I want it to be groups of 6, but I'm still in 4/4. So you could have different click patterns and then have those automatically match. So you can say, okay, I want this for this particular passage to be divided into 6, but I still want my meter at 4/4, and I want this to play back. So we could have, even though we're still in 4/4, then we could go to a traditional 4/4. So you could have your different time signatures on signature tracks. Each signature that you enter could have a different pattern. And then you could just come over here and enter in different tempo data. If you want to do this all in one window, it's just Command or Control plus the letter T. So you may not have, like in Cubase Elements, dedicated tempo and signature tracks, but you can kind of do it all within this one tempo editor window that can be accessed by holding Command or Control plus the letter T. All right. All right, you see John Costigan saying Windows 11 was a serious pain in the neck. And there's information on Jazz Dude about optimizing. All right, so we see All About Music asks, my loops and samples only make sound in preview only if control room is off. Can you shed some light on this? Saw many YouTube videos, but couldn't understand much. So generally, I've always had it work. I'll just do a new project here. I guess I don't need to. So let's say we want to like preview different loops here. So now I'm previewing. All right, so I have, when I go to my audio connections under Studio, I have my control room. I'm going to disable that. And now when I go to listen, nothing is previewing. All right, and let's get to my audio connections to my outputs. And I'm going to, we'll get rid of the 5.1 out. Let's come here. I'm going to remap to the stereo, and let's see if we have. So here it's previewing without the control room. So I think you could also try to, you know, if you run into, let's say if I add a different bus here, and if I right click and say set stereo out as main mix, that now the preview doesn't work. So, you know, you could try, you know, if you're in your outputs here, And let me just switch these. So now the preview doesn't work, but if I go to and say, you know, I want it to go to this one, and we set as main mix, you can do that. But as you can see, when I remove this bus and I don't have, so now we could preview. And if I go to my, set this to not connected, and go to the control room, enable it, now everything is being routed through the control room. So it could be maybe, you know, you have the main monitor mix is off, but, you know, having a control room has always worked for me, but I see people online that turn it off and say that solves their problem. So, but maybe the control room wasn't configured right. All right, so All About Music just says amazing, lots of love from India. Thanks for joining us from India. All right, so All About Music asks, can any sample be dragged into the sampler track to, you know, to create an instrument? So yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to do like 5.1 interlude, but mono or stereo tracks, all you have to do is drag and drop or right click and say create sampler track, and then now you can play back the particular sound as audio. So mono, stereo, doesn't matter. Okay, so All About Music says these streams are gold mines. Thanks for the effort, Greg. So you're welcome. Hope they're helpful for people. All right, so Flyv just says step and ramp, then click patterns. Thanks, Greg. I think I got it all down now. Sorry if I asked twice. So you could ask as many times as you want. All right, so you see Chris on. It says he had Magic Studio 06. Michael Pierce is telling Nick that it never stops. I think they're both having to work over a holiday weekend. So it's the plight of being independently wealthy and not having a normal job when you work in studio environments, your traditional desk jockey job. All right, so I think we had a couple questions that were sent in. Let me jump over to one of those. All right, so we had a question. Looking to map dedicated volume faders on a hardware controller to tracks 1 and 2. So no matter what track I have selected, I have different fader for that. These hardware controller faders will always be for mixer tracks 1 and 2. Okay. So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and let's open up a project. So what we want to do is just have faders that are always assigned to particular tracks. So I'm going to come over, let's go to this project. So we have traditional multi-track. Okay, so let's say we have our band project. Now a lot of times when we have control surfaces, so let's say we come over here to my nano control, I'll come over and just say mixer. Now once we have mixer, you may notice that we have like 8 faders on my control surface, and these 8 faders, we'll see this little white line, and this is indicating the faders. And we could have a bank button. So if I wanted to go to the next 8 tracks, the previous 8 tracks, we could just bank. So if we had, you know, a number of audio tracks in our project, so say we come over here and we look at in the mix console, we could see, let me just, we can see this white line indicating which particular channels are being controlled. So often, if we wanted faders to be dedicated to, only tracks 1 and 2 and not to have those bank, what we could do is go into the MIDI remote, and I'm going to just go in. I'm just going to duplicate this mapping page here quickly. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to just change the mapping assistant for these two faders. All right, so these are kind of set to tracks 1 and 2. If I'm in bank 1, if I go to the next bank, this will be controlling, banks 9 through 16. So as we navigate to our different banks. But again, if I wanted this to be fixed, I would come over to the MIDI remote, select this. I'm going to go to this channel. Let's get to the fader here. And what I want to do is right click on the fader and say pick up for MIDI remote mapping. I'm going to move fader 1, click on apply mapping. I go to fader 2. I move this unit, I move the fader, and I'm going to right click and say pick up for MIDI remote mapping, and then click apply fader. So if I have channel 14, let's say channel 30 selected, this, whatever bank I'm on, so we'll just come over here. These two faders are always going to be tied to channels 1 through 2. When I bank over, and so I move channels 1 and 2, and I move channel 3 on my fader. This would be the third channel within the bank, but when I move 1 and 2, they're going to be fixed for that particular channel, but the rest of them are going to be kind of just banked over. So to have it dedicated, if you always want fader 1 to always be on this track and fader 2 always to be on the second track, so if it's dialogue and sound effects, whatever, you can just, again, right click and pick up for MIDI remote mapping, move the fader you wanted to assign to, click apply mapping, and while the rest of it could be banking, those particular faders will be fixed for that particular channel. All right, so you see Michael Pierce he can't wait to share a project though, but it's under NDA, so sounds good. So we have Uno Memento is just asking, have you already pressed the like button? If not, do it now. And there are lots of likes. Greg and Steinberg are happy, and we get more of these streams. Okay, Ronnie Large asks, hi, I accidentally changed my panner to this real cool looking panner, which looks like a single windshield wiper in a rectangular box. How can I replicate it? Okay, so what that is indicating is, so we see when we look at my mixer here, we have kind of traditional panners. So I'll come here, we'll zoom in the mixer. But if there is a surround or like a multi-channel output, what we could do, so I'm going to come over here, let's go to my outputs. So I just have a stereo out. But let's say if I add a 5.1 output bus, we notice that the panner will now change to kind of like your windshield wiper. It's a great description of it. So here, we still have this routed to a stereo group, but we have a 5.1 or surround element within the particular project. So this way, all the panners will change accordingly. So it gives you the same left to right panning information. It looks different. Some people like it. Some people are confused by it. But if I now go back to my audio connections under the studio menu, And if I get rid of the 5.1 output, and this could also be a 5.1 group, a 5.1 effects channel, a 5.1 external instrument, but once I replicate the multi-channel output, we'll look at our panners. We'll go back to our traditional. So we'll just come here, remove the 5.1 out, and now we have our traditional stereo panners. But again, adding a 5.1 bus, then that will change all the panners to the windshield wiper type. So let me know if that makes sense for you. All right, so we have Philip Thomas checking in from Switzerland. Says, great tutorial, thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us today. Always wanted to go to Switzerland. All right, so we see All About Music just asks, if I want 16 tracks in a Halion instance, I have to activate 16 output channels to control each one with separate effects like reverb, etc. Is that true? So if you wanted to use like the external plugins, but we'll start a new project here. Okay, I'm going to add an instance of Halion Sonic. All right, so let's say, okay, so I'm going to have kind of a Rhodes on that, and let's put maybe, so if we go to channel 2, I'm just going to add a MIDI track. All right, so say I have drums here, and I have a row, kind of my Wurlitzer. All right, so if we wanted these to communicate with like a plugin, so we would have different amounts, we would be able to kind of simply utilize multi-outs. But, realize that when we're working with Halion Sonic, that we have built-in effects as well. So I could say, okay, I want it to put chorusing on. So let's go to your modulation, and let's say, okay, we want chorusing. And let's say on send 2, I want it to have a reverb. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go to my mixer and say, okay, on my drum channel, I could have the reverb. And when we go to our Rhodes channel, maybe I don't want reverb, I want chorusing. And let's say we're going to add, when we go to our effects section, we could also just have, let's say, delay. So we'll just come over here. We want, let's say, quarter note delay. So I want a delay on the Rhodes. So again, we come here to the mix. And let's say we go to our drums now instead. So, inside of Halion Sonic SE, then you have the capability of having 4 different effect sends. Now, if you're running with a third-party plugin outside of Halion Sonic SE, and we're running it as an effects channel track, so we'll just come right over here to add our effect track, and we want it to be, let's say, a Revelation reverb. Now, at this point, if we want it separate processing, let's say on my, so we'll come here. And let's say we come over to our drums. So at this point, if we wanted varying amounts, this is when we would activate the different outputs. So as we play our different sends, we'll come over. Let me just hide my input channels. So we could select. So at this point, we'll say, okay, we're going to go to our effect sends. Let's send it to the reverb. So if I want a lot of reverb on my particular drums, and let's say, okay, we go to slot 2, and I could now add, when we play our drums, I want just a bit of reverb. So we could have this reverb. So it's when you want to use like third-party plugins that you use the multi-outputs if you wanted to have flexibility within the instrument for being able to map everything to independent effects processing for plugins, but you realize that inside of Halion you have a whole suite of plugins that could be used as well, and then you could do everything internally from a single stereo output. All right, so we see all about music. Just says, please, if you could elaborate on the multi-timbral usage of Halion, it would help. Okay, so let's say we're going to start off. I'll remove this patch. Okay, so we're going to start with okay, so we have one voice here. So when we play, we can see our ballad time. So we're going to have, so if I wanted to have another voice, we could have 16 different instruments loaded. So let's say I wanted to load up a synthesizer sound. I could come over here. And now if we wanted to kind of, so we could listen to what's going on what's in the first slot, the second slot. Let's load something in the third slot. Let's say kind of like an FM sound. Okay, so let's say we have these 3 different sounds. We have one instance of how, now if I wanted all these to be working in multi-timbral, what we could do now is we'll come here. So we're going to say this one, we're going to just check our MIDI channel here. So as we do this, we'll say, we'll look at our MIDI. We could have these, if I wanted all these to be layered together, I could put all of them on MIDI channel 1. Okay, now let's say if I'll just, so we have, let's say we have one track, we could have these set to function in multi-timbral. So I'm going to remove, so we have like multiple instruments that are stacked together and layered. And if we want to just get rid of these to make it a little easier to show. So if we wanted to at this point say, while we have this selected, all 3 sounds are generating, we could say I want to transpose this, the FM patch up an octave. And we could also come over here and say, I only want the FM sound to come in on these keys, and at these velocities, I don't want the beach dance sound. So if I play something very soft, we could adjust our velocity range to say, okay, only at high velocities do I get that sound. Now, if I wanted these to all be on separate tracks, what I could do is we start with an instrument track. Then I could add 2 MIDI tracks, and I'm going to start these on MIDI channel 2. So as we add our tracks, now we could have, and we come here, let's say to MIDI channel 2, I'm going to add another MIDI track. Sorry, let me just, and if we put this to channel 3, it's automatically going to assume the same MIDI output port. So now we're running multi-timbral. We have this set to MIDI channels 1, 2, and 3. So I play this. And then we could just come over here. So we could have up to 16 different instruments loaded here and played multi-timbral, or if we wanted these all to be layered together, we could just come here, play MIDI channel 1, so you could, treat this as a 16-part multi-timbral. And to get the MIDI tracks, just simply select this, right-click, add a MIDI track, increment the MIDI channel, and then you could have 1 instrument track and 15 MIDI tracks to be working as a 16-part multi-timbral, being that these will default to the individual channels, or you could layer them all together on one particular MIDI channel if you wanted to. And then you have the ability of adjusting the key range that you want for the levels, the velocity, as well as other controls. So when I move the mod wheel, it gets to this point, I could bring in this voice or not. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, Michael Pierce just says, I don't think enough people know about the stereo combined panner, hidden little feature that's so very, very useful. Yeah, so let's take a look at our stereo combined panner. So there's, 2 different panning modes. So if you have a stereo track, sometimes you may want to actually be able to pan something in, where it's going to be mostly panned to the right or mostly panned to the left. So when we're on a stereo track, so let's say we'll just do this on our full mix here. And to get to the stereo panner, what we want to do is just kind of right click on our stereo output here, or right click on it, and we can say let's get to, so we have a balanced panner. The balanced panner will allow us to kind of just adjust panning on a particular track left or right. But if we choose the combined panner, what we could do is now take all the tracks. If I want to be very focused, it was 7th grade in the school parking, and if I wanted this to be panned to the right or to the left, or if I wanted to be kind of the panning spectrum to be a bit more narrow. And one of the cool things you could do with this, the combined panner, so we could have kind of the full panning spectrum. But if we go and continue to go upward vertically, we could invert the panning as well. So when you see it orange, that means that the panning controls are inverted. So if I'm over here and I invert, So instead of having like, you know, I see some programs have like a separate left channel and a right channel panner where you have to kind of control two knobs, you know, and for those that are using a mouse primarily, that could be hard. But here we have one single control to control kind of the panning, where it falls within the stereo spectrum, and the panning width, and the ability to invert the panning with the stereo combined panner. All right, Uno Momento just says, Greg, what's the process if I wanted to change an audio bass drum to a VST bass drum, saying Groove Agent? All right, yeah, this is a great function of Cubase. So let's come over here. Let's take this project. Okay, so I'll just revert. All right, so let's say we want to do kind of like a drum replacement. So I'm going to add a Groove Agent instrument. And I'll load up one of the optional libraries. Yeah, with the Marco Miniman's great stuff. Okay, so I want to take this particular kick drum and I want to use that as the replacement for Groove Agent. Okay, so what I want to do is we have this track selected. I'm going to now come over and say, okay, let's take a look at and we have a kick drum recording here. So as we do this, I'm going to just double click on the particular track here, and we'll go to our hit points. So when we do this, we kind of want our hit points to not include like drum tracks are bleeding through. And then what I'm going to do, when you see this little create tab, I'm going to say let's create MIDI notes. I want it to be the dynamic velocity. I want it to go on to pitch C0. And I want it to, I'm going to select my Groove Agent track. And then so we're going to create our MIDI notes, and I want it to go on to the first selected track, which is where my Groove Agent is. I hit OK. And now we're triggering. So I'm going to mute the original kick drums. And we open up our Groove Agent here. So let's say I want to take this. We'll take this particular kick drum and let's just make, you know, we could increase the volume. We could come over here, add more room sound. So if I mute, we don't hear any kicks. So I could blend the original kicks with this particular kick. And if you wanted to load up different kits, so say I want to take this kick and just tune it. So now we have everything in the MIDI domain. So again, just double clicking on the part, come over here, find the hit points. Once you have those kind of dialed in so that you're not copying over like tracks are bleeding through, it's easy enough, just a matter of seconds. Click on create, click MIDI notes. We could put it to the first selected track, or you can make a new track, put it on the pitch you want, and retain the velocity. And then you've just done your drum sample replacement that easily. See Ronnie Large, or Ronnie Large just says, thanks, makes perfect sense. All right, Roger Isla, hi, I'm a longtime Cubase user. Thanks for joining us today. And now looking for a new Windows machine. Could you give suggestions of processor, motherboard, and others? Thanks. So I haven't tried out every single Windows configuration. I know Jazz Dude does a lot more work with this. So I think, Jazz Dude prefers Ryzen processors, thinks that they're a great bang for the buck. You could also, I personally, for my system, I have an i9 with an Asus motherboard. I got mine because it has Thunderbolt 4 and USB 4. I think it would be more future-proof. I have 128 gigs of RAM and maybe like 6 terabytes of NVMe SSD drives. So, if you're doing a lot of orchestral stuff, I would recommend, having the ability to go up to 128 gigs of RAM. If you're doing mostly audio stuff, you'd probably be fine with 32 or 64 for like really heavy projects, so it could depend on your type of work, and check out like what different builders are doing. I'm sure that there's lots of information in the Discord as well about, sometimes it's Steinberg, like, not every company sends every motherboard, every processor for them to kind of play around with, but Cubase will take advantage of all. If you have like a hybrid setup with efficiency cores and processing cores, those will be taken advantage of. So it's a great time to be getting new computers, but maybe other people have done a recent computer build, might be able to share some experience in the chat. All right, so we see kind words from Nungu60A. Says, I want to commend you for your dedication to these training videos. Listening to these videos keeps me highly motivated to make time for my studio. So I'm just glad to be able to help people. But thank you for the kind words. It means a lot. All right, so All About Music says, as new music producers, should we use riser samples or learn how to create risers in Retrologue? So, I think doing risers, and you can do it in just about any instrument, so I wouldn't think that you would need to get, particular kind of like samples for that with all of the functionality that's inside of Cubase. Okay, so we see from comment from Michael Pierce says, actually, despite the single mouse control for combined panner, is there a way to set up a dual physical controller setup with two knobs? Missing the point. So it's not available for some reason. I kind of pointed this out in some reports and feedback from some of the Club Cubase sessions. So in the MIDI remote, if we have a stereo track, and we have the panner set to combined panner, we can come over here and pick up for MIDI remote, and we only pan one side in the MIDI remote, so it's kind of a little annoying. But what we can do is, and it's kind of an older workaround, hopefully this will be a way to do it in the newer MIDI remote. But one of the things that can happen is if we go to your studio setup, and we could do it through generic MIDI remote. So if you wanted to go to your generic remote, we could say, okay, I want this particular knob here, and that way we could say, okay, we want to go to I think, let's say VST mixer device. And then you'll see like pan. So you see pan left, right. And then you could also, for your second knob, you'll see on the selected, and you'll go to standard panner. And then you have pan left, right, and pan left, right 2. So pan left, right 2, that would allow you to basically set up 2 knobs to just have control from a control surface for your combined panner instead of just a 1 with a MIDI remote. So once you're in the generic remote, you can set pan left, right and pan left, right 2 under as 2 separate knobs, and that way you could have physical controls for left and right for the combined panner mode. All right, wonderful to see inactive user on. It says, my question is, for what is the wave meter in the Cubase mixer view? And the second question, how can I gate with a direct offline process and see if my gate is set correctly? All right, so let's take a look at the meter view. All right, so what the meter view is going to allow us to do in the mixer. So we have meters up at the top. So let's say, I'll just fast forward a little bit here. All right, so the wave meter view, what it's going to do is kind of give you an idea. So when we see our PPM meters here, but we could also switch to meter type at the top to wave, and this shows us what's going on in the audio waveform. So even if we have nothing going on in these tracks really, we could see ahead of time. So we could see like the overheads here, we could see the kicks. So we have a couple of kick mics, we can see our snare mics. So this is showing us basically the audio waveform so that we could see events that are coming and events that right at this center line is where the events are happening in time. But we could just see all the different tracks as they're coming and as they happen and as they've passed, just to get a sense of when different parts of your project are going in and out. Okay. Okay, the second question is, how can I gate with a direct offline processing and see if my gate is set correctly? All right, so let's say we wanted to do something like a typical gating scenario might be toms. So when we look at something like our gate, like we're going to hear other elements bleeding through. So probably like, you know, we have our toms come in right here. And then we're just hearing other elements. So if we wanted to do an offline process to basically render or plug into a track, we could hit F7. We could come over to plugins, and we'll choose our dynamics and choose gate. So we could kind of set a threshold, and if we have auto apply set, at that point, we could just process that particular track. So when we have this track selected, we could just apply the gate. So let's say we want more of the gate to come through. So when we undo this process, so let's say we delete, we hear all these tracks bleeding through. But again, if we can see now that we've applied that processing to the gate, we have a tom, looks like it's coming up here. And now that gate, we could just listen to it, has been applied to the particular track. But as we would play from here, and we choose to delete, we're going to hear all those tracks. So, you know, just use your ears for it. So if we want to just render that gate, say, okay, maybe we want to set the threshold a little higher. So now we're not hearing we're not hearing anything because everything, the gate has been processed on a particular event. So we cut. And now you could hear how the gate is being interactive. So you could just do it in real time and listen to it. All right, so we have All About Music. Just says, is it possible to emulate seamless portamento using Iconica, which is extremely important in Indian classical music compositions? All right, so let's take a look. We'll start off with Iconica Sketch. All right, so let's see if we could. All right, so, you know, we can set kind of the pitch bend range. So let's just find out real quick. Sorry. All right, let me just. Look for it real quick. Sorry. Usually. Just have brain cramp on the pitch bend range, but you could, you know, generally always adjust it. It's kind of in different spots. Just. Usually somewhere on the MIDI interface itself. So, well, it may not be portamento, but if you wanted to. And one of the other cool things that you're also able to do with this, I'm just trying to. But if one of the cool things you do, since it's running inside of Hallion, is you could also use the Microtuner. So I'm not sure if this is applicable for Indian classical music or not, but if we go to our MIDI inserts, we could go to the Microtuner, and we could say, okay, I want to play in the key of, say, and here we could go to different temperaments. So if we wanted to just but I'm not sure if there's like I know we could, like in the sampler track, do that. We might be able to tweak it a bit. Let me just see if there's. Yeah, so we could have kind of the different tunings. So if I was playing a G chord, like say I want the G. So here you get adjusted temperaments on each note if you wanted to as well. But I'm not seeing kind of a portamento, but I could play around with it some more and see for Tuesday's live stream. I'll make a note to see if I could figure it out. All right, so you see from Roger, just says thanks for the info. See Michael Pierce, just giving some computer suggestions. Thank you, Michael, for that. All right, so we gave Michael Pierce a revelation of the day with the left rate and left rate 2. Okay, so we see, can I get one pattern to play in different keys? In Beat Designer, I like my hi-hats in different keys. Okay, so it's, okay, so let's make just like a hi-hat sampler track. Okay. Okay, so now we have a hi-hat. Okay, so if you wanted to, you know, one of the things that you could do is, let's say we just have, just adjust this quickly. So let's just add maybe a chord track. Okay, so we have, let's say we wanted to come over here to our sampler track. We will put in just some different notes here. So let's say we'll do quarter notes. Okay, so now when we do this, let's say we have, now we could actually have this particular, so since we have like the chords, you know, one of the things that you could do is just have it follow the chord track, let's say on root notes. So you could do that, but but now that we have kind of like the sampler track laid out for us, if you wanted to do like Beat Designer, you know, so let's say I don't have a pattern here, so you know, using a chord track might be an option, but let's say I want to start it on C3. And if we wanted to just kind of come here, let's say, okay, I want to, we'll say copy the pattern. I'll go here to the next pattern bank and let's paste. But I want to take all these notes. So let's say we'll put this on G3. Then you could just trigger so if we wanted to do a new pattern, again, I could paste and let's just change the pitch here to F3. Then you could just kind of take and switch between, so let's say if we'll make this E1. So you could just kind of copy the pattern and then play, figure out what note that you want it to play, and then just go back and trigger the different patterns here. So you can copy that particular pattern and then just simply switch the playback note and then hit a MIDI note to switch between these different patterns. All right, so Darren Flake asks, hi Greg, question, how to trigger gate plugin on vocals via MIDI to activate and disable the process of going to the audio with MIDI? Okay. All right, so we'll do something highly inappropriate for this song. Let's say we want to open up the gate on the vocal. All right, so there is a plugin called a MIDI gate. So I want to take the vocal here and let's go under Dynamics. And you'll see, not under Distortion, sorry, Dynamics, you'll see MIDI gate. Okay, so now that I have that on that track, I'm going to add a MIDI track. And this MIDI track, we're going to send the output to our MIDI gate plugin. Okay, so we see our MIDI gate event input. So as I do this, let's say we're playing along, we'll hear the vocal, and then as I play a MIDI note,
It was a long time ago. It was 17 cool pot.
so I'll open up just the, so as soon as I send a MIDI message,
My way hard through. Caught my breath while you caught it.
so I'll just solo this, and when I hit a MIDI note, that will open up the gate.
Caught my breath while you caught it. So in love.
I'll just solo on the guitars. So again, try the MIDI gate, and then as soon as you send MIDI messages, you could have it put it on with a note on or note off message. So again, we come over here, let's say, I'll just take this guitar part. Let's go to Dynamics, MIDI gate, add a MIDI track. And we want that MIDI gate on the guitar insert. So now when I so when a MIDI note is sent, the gate opens, or if we wanted to reverse that, we could just so just kind of come right over there, and as you're playing, and if you wanted to adjust the note release, so I let go, it will just gradually fade out. So if you want to take the timing, let go, or how long you want it to, the attack. So if we want kind of a slow attack, we can, and a slow release. So you could just open up and close the gate by just sending MIDI notes. So if you want to take like one MIDI part and use that as like a rhythmic gate for like a synth pad or something like that to give it kind of more activity, you could do that quite easily. All right, All About Music asks how to chop audio portions from very audio to change the pitch of a note or cut them into two different pitch notes. Okay, so we'll come over here to our lead vocal and we'll launch very audio. All right, so if we wanted to kind of split the notes, if you just go to the bottom, so I have my smart controls. It doesn't really matter what your smart controls are set to, but if you wanted to, let's say we zoom in here on this particular note, if you go to the bottom center, just go to the bottom area, then you could split notes within very audio. So you could just come here and split accordingly. If you wanted to join them together, I think if you just kind of go to the lower right hand corner of the event, you could then join the segments together when you see a glue gun pop up. So then you could take one segment and turn it into two different notes if you wanted to have a little more control over it. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, so we see Darren Flake just says, I fixed the audio performance peaks. Greg, thanks. Now the real-time peak is almost 3%, and it's from Windows 11. All right, thanks for letting me know. All right, inactive user asks, thank you, Greg. How can I copy my direct offline processing to other audio events if I decide later to do the same processing on the other events? Okay, so let's say we've done, I want to take my guitar part here, and let's do some offline processing. So I'm going to hit F7, or you go to the audio menu to the direct offline processing, and let's say, okay, I really want to do just a touch of EQ, so I'll open up my frequency EQ. So let's say I want this as the EQ. I want just a little bit of my black valve compressor. All right, and let's do one more. Let's say just maybe like a little bit of chorusing. So I want just a little touch of chorusing. All right. So if I like this particular offline process, what I could do is I'm going to select the three of them. I could drag it down here as a preset. So I will just come right over here. Let's name the preset Darren. And now when I want to apply that preset to a file, I could just double click and have that automatically applied to another selected file. So once you have those different processes, all you'd have to do is select all of them and drag it down and make a preset, just like that. So let me know if that makes sense, and if you wanted to, we'll go back and undo these changes. So once you have that chain, drag it down into your preview area, and then you can make your own presets, and you could trigger those presets from a keyboard shortcut or from a MIDI remote mapper, MIDI remote device as well. All right. Highest Building asks, hi Greg, in the key editor we can drag and drop chords from the chord editor in the left zone into the editor. Is there a way to add chords to an existing node event without duplicating it? Okay, so let me just take a quick look. Let me just make a chord track here. All right, so we can drag and drop chords from the chord editor in the left zone into the editor. Is there a way to add chords to an existing node event without duplicating it? All right, let me see if I need to, not sure if I've done that before. Let me just, let's do new event, sorry. So I don't know if it's, this is kind of, let me set the, so if this is the area, so let's, okay, so we look at this, we can see D major chord. Let's come over here, let's select that, and it's going to show our chords there. So you see A major, okay. So we can drag and drop from the chord editor to left zone into the editor as a way to add chords to an existing node event without duplicating it. So let me know if this is what you're, all right, so let's say we want to Okay, so let's say if we take this and let's just move our inversion down. Okay. So I think the intention is not to necessarily drag and drop, but if we wanted to take these particular chords here, and then if we wanted to, you know, make it minor or add seventh and do different inversions. So I think it's designed for the internal chords as opposed to adding the chords. So, but I could do some more research on that for Tuesday's live stream. But let me know if I'm kind of going like down the right path. All right, so we have Steve McAndrews from Greece. Says he's sorry for joining late. So the only thing you have to do is just hit the like button. Let's see. So we see from All About Music, says Indian violinist would slide 8 semitones, which is difficult to emulate here. So yeah, I'll kind of check it out because I know sometimes we add an instrument track, like depending on the instrument. So let's say if I come over here, just trying to see if we could, let me just look, see if it's in here for the pitch bend range, but I think you should be able to do it, but once you kind of set the pitch bend range for the particular instrument, I'll take one more quick look at it and see. But it's defaulting to 2 semitones, but I'll play with it some more, but I'm sure I could find it. Let me just... Sorry, just having a brain cramp on that. All right. But yeah, I think we should be able to get that sorted out. All right, so we see Steve McAndrew asks, my question is how to use a logical editor to A, chop an audio file on an audio track to remove the silence, and then bounce and rename all the resulting files with numerical increment addendums. Okay, and he says, what I mean is, let's say the audio file is called guitar that has silence between sections, that the silence can be stripped to produce, for instance, guitar 1, guitar 02, etc. Okay, so I don't think it's a logical editor that could do it, but I think we could do it maybe in 2 separate editing processes. Okay. Okay, so let's say we have this and multiple guitar parts, and I'm just going to bounce them together. Okay, so let's come over here and go to audio. I'm just going to try to detect silence here. So let's set our threshold. All right, so let's say I process this. All right, so we're going to give it a name. And then increment. So we're going to add as regions. So once we did that, we can see that this is we see the numbers 1, 2, 3. So it looks, so if we undo that, so again, we can, so maybe just, it looks like to detect silence. So go to advanced to detect silence, kind of set your thresholds. And then you could add as regions. Now these will be added as regions. Let me just adjust my threshold up. All right, so I'll do that. So we'll process. These will now be regions. Let's go into our pool window. So the naming has automatically been updated. So we see our regions here. So, and we can see that the naming has automatically been updated. And then if I want to turn these into audio files, we could right click and go to audio to bounce selection. We could define a new folder, and there are automatically new audio files where the numbers are incremented. So do a detect silence from the audio, from advanced, detect silence. We want to add them as regions. You could type in the name. And then hit process. They will, when we go to the pool afterwards, and that's Control or Command P, you'll see all of the regions here with their numbers incremented. And at that point, we would choose process and or audio to bounce selection, and they would all be turned into audio files. So let me know if that is kind of what you're looking to do, Steve. Okay. Okay, so we see from All About Music, I accidentally found out that a stock electric guitar transposed to 4th octave offers heavy metal mute effects on some notes. Is there any manual to study all these features? So they're probably not going to go through the 10,000 presets and document everything, but if we are going to, one thing that you could always use to kind of check out. So let's come over here. We'll go to our Hylian Sonic. And let's load up kind of a guitar. Let's say electric guitar. We'll say distorted. So a lot of times when you see these keys here, these will often kind of change the sound. So we can see that we're going to be in open position, and if you hover over, we will say dead position. So more sustain. But if you just kind of hover over, so these may not all be, you could see kind of what, and different instruments will give you different options, but if you hover over, also if you're in the MIDI editor for a particular event here, you could also just come over here to the expression map, and if it's in Hylian, you can say import key switches, and then you could actually just see what exact key switches and options are available for that patch that will automatically be broken up. So if you now want to So whenever you see kind of the different colored notes, those will kind of change the sound. So just kind of look for that, and then you could, as you hover the mouse over the particular notes, it'll tell you what that articulation is doing, at least in Hylian. All right, so we see Steve McAndrew says, be in how to use Project Logical Editor to rename a number of audio parts on a track with numerically ascending names. Okay. All right, so I'm going to just record a bunch of different files here. Okay, so let's say if we want to, let's see if we could rename the selected files. I know like Nuendo has a couple more things like this, but let's see if we could do it in the Project Logical Editor. So I'm not sure if we could have those automatically renamed, but let's, sorry. All right, so let's say we're going to replace audio 01. Let me see if this is it. All right, so say we'll call it Steve. Okay, so all of those files are selected. We'll see if they all get renamed to Steve. Okay. And let's see if we do a name operation. And append number +1. So yeah, so here we could just see the number 15, 16, 17, probably 18, and 19. So try selecting the event. You're going to choose transform. We're going to say media type is equal to audio, name. So if we wanted to get rid of the audio and replace it with something else, Steve, guitar, whatever. And then you could also say we want to append and renumber. And then we could just choose to renumber 1 here. So give that a try. All right, so we see All About Music says, what is your view on the never-ending debate of whether to use effects like reverb as inserts or send? So generally, I'm of the school of, like I could see for some particular music where it's intentional that, you know, maybe the snare is a different reverb than the vocal, which is a different reverb than a guitar. I understand where that can make sense in a mix. What I think is silly is when people use the same reverb multiple times as sends. That's just kind of doesn't make any sense, or as inserts. So a lot of times I see people using the same reverb 16 different times as inserts on tracks, but it's the same exact settings. That's when you'd want to use a send. I find, and maybe I'm just of the school where I try to make everything sound more coherent. So I want everything to, you know, like I want everything to kind of sound to me like it's in the same room for the most part, just as a basis. So I would, you know, a lot of times when I'm mixing, I may not have 4 or 5 reverbs. I may just have a single reverb and try to be, you know, like in the 80s and early 90s when digital reverbs were giving sounds that were not traditionally available. You know, people, I think, abused the reverb because it was something new, and it's like, hey, I got an expensive reverb, I'm going to use it in my production, and people would have like 10 different reverbs, and it sounds like it's 10 different records going on sometimes. So at that point, you know, I would say if you need to use it for the best, you know, to make the mix come across better, to make it more musically, you know, have a more emotional musical connection, and the different reverbs help, then use those as inserts if needed. But if you use it as an insert, you want to use that same reverb on a different source, then you're kind of, you know, you're kind of out of luck. So I tend to use them as sends. But there's no right or wrong way. All right. All right, so we see inactive user just says, thanks Greg, by the way, my Cubase is still on an older version. How can I update it? I've never done that before. I'm still on Cubase 13.03, but want to update to Cubase 13.041. So all you have to do is if you go to the Steinberg Download Assistant, okay, so just open this up, and you'll look under My Products, and you'll go to your Cubase 13. All right, so you say we'll go to Cubase Pro 13 under My Products, and then you'll just see the Cubase 13, you'll see the latest version here, and then you could just click on install, and that will update your 13.03 to 13.041. So it'll give you the latest version. Okay, so we have all about music. Is there a way to write your own macro scripts in Cubase? For example, I want every third note to reduce velocity by 30%. Okay, yeah, so it's not a macro necessarily, but just like a project logical editor. So let me just... Okay, so let's say we're going to just come here to, let's look at, say we just have some notes in the drums here. So these are all the same velocity. Okay, so I want every third note to decrease. So this is what the logical editor is like kind of a perfect example of. So if we go to MIDI and we'll go to your logical editor. So let's say I just want to, we'll go to setup. So we want to come over here, and this is our, think of it as like a Boolean conditional editor. So we're going to, do we want to select, delete, transform, or change? So I'm going to transform, and we're going to say notes. And what we want to do is to say we want to take the velocity of the notes. Okay, now before I do that, sorry. And let's say we're going to come over here to what's called, I think, last event. And we'll say every other event to event counter. So we'll say 3. So what we're going to do is to take every third note. And what we want to do is we're going to transform the velocity. And you want it down by 30%, so we'll multiply by 0.7. And if I did this right, all right, so now we'll just take all those notes with the same velocity, and every third note is now down 70%. So again, we want to transform, type is equal to note, last event, every other event, our event counter, we're going to choose 3. And then so that's going to say every other third note, what do we want to do? We want it every other third note. Now we've defined what we want to do something to, and what do we want to do for it, and that's in the transform actions. And then we'll choose, we're going to take the velocity and multiply it by 0.7. So now every other third note, the velocity is down by 70%. So all sorts of amazing things you could do like that using the logical editor. All right, so we see Darren Flake says, thanks, Greg. Commit to the offline process. Can you hear the audio sample while tweaking the sample? All right, so let's say I want to do this. All right, so I hit F7. So there is this kind of preview, so you could audition. So let's say if I'm here and I want to run it through So let's say, okay, I want to do like flanger on it. So if you want to make changes, as you make a change, it would automatically just update. So let's say, okay, now I want to run it through a delay. So we'll just come right over here, say, okay, I want to do like a multi-tap delay. And we can see all the presets. So now, and as you make changes, so you could try just the audition right there and give that a try. All right, so you just see, hi Greg, can you drag from the chord edit tab to create a new chord? My question was if you can add a similar way to add a chord on top of an existing note. All right, so let's take a look. So I don't think from the side, but let's take a look. Let's jump back to, let's say, our MIDI. So we have some MIDI notes here. We'll look at this in key editor. So let's say if I have a chord track in my project, and we are in, so at this point we could say, okay, let's get to our global tracks and let's look at our chord track. So we have, very similar. Okay, so I want to come here, let's make it F minor with a flat ninth going to A sus4. And then at this point we could, from the project menu, let's see if we could just, yeah, we could do it from, but if we go to the project menu, let's go to our chord track and we say chords to MIDI. All right, so once we have kind of like our chords, so we have our notes here, I'm going to choose my MIDI mode here to merge. Let's just see. Now if I drag these over, so, but generally we could drag chords and have them automatically here, but if we want it on top of existing MIDI, you may have to like drag it, and then if you hold down the, so, and then if you just merge the events by grabbing the glue gun, so let's say as we do this, even though it's on a different track, I could take these chords from the chord track, drag them over. I could select all of those and hold down the Alt or Option. And now those chords are added on top of the existing MIDI data. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to accomplish. So it's not, I don't think, draggable from over here. And this is, I think, designed more to kind of just change the existing chords. But if you have a chord track, you could drag those chords into tracks as well. All right, so we see Darren Flake says triggering via MIDI is also a very powerful tool. Can do automation on the info line for fine tune or transpose. Is that for the, let me see if I could, let's see if this is going back to, all right, let me just get my time here. Hang on. See if I can find the previous question. That's referencing. Okay, so maybe that was just triggering about the triggering the gate plugin with the vocals. Okay, so triggering via MIDI, I guess, is with the MIDI gate is a very powerful tool. Can do automation on the info line for fine tune or transpose. So it doesn't really. So I'm not sure if you want the MIDI gate to do fine tuning or transposition. Maybe Darren, if you could just specify that, that would be helpful for me. All right, so you see Darren Flake just says Cubase 5 to 11, myself then 13 Pro, still dividing my process, but everything ends up in Cubase. Movement-wise, had to split the process to get a better result and hold on to computer efforts. Okay. Okay, so we see All About Music says some of the third-party sound samples go under block list by Cubase. Any specific reasons? So, generally sounds aren't put into the block list. It may not show up, here. So if you wanted to see like all the cool icons, these, are indicative that they have all the proper metadata. But what gets block listed is when you go to like plugins. So if you have plugins that are blocklisted, it might mean that they are not compatible with your operating system. It could be a VST2 plugin, and if you're running on Mac OS and running natively on Apple Silicon, then you're not able to run VST2 plugins natively on Apple Silicon. So those will get blocklisted, and sometimes plugins that are when you start up Cubase the very first time, it'll do a quick analysis and it will do kind of an integrity check of your particular plugins. So you could actually, and if the plugin fails that test, then it's probably going to show up in the block list. Or if it's a 32-bit plugin, it'll show up in a block list. So, it could be that, there's something with a particular plugin that would cause instability issues, and that's why it's going to be, in the block list. All right, so we see Yassian says about a question about possible adding vocals to the drum editor. So we did that earlier. I think it was like maybe the first question. But if you are dealing with something like where I think from the screenshots that you shared, we'll just cover it again quickly. So if we want to see the other voices in the drum editor, you'll see like a little icon in the drum editor here. So that could restrict to only show the voices that are within the part, and you have different options here. Or if you want to see all available voices, turn this icon on and off within the drum editor. So let me know if that's what you want to do, Yassian. All right, so, and we see from All About Music, hoping you look into the pitch bend range issue for Iconica, so I definitely will. All right, so we see inactive user. How can I snap my audio event to other events, but at the same time to the BPM? Okay. So, audio files in Cubase can play back in musical or linear mode. And what musical mode is going to allow you to do is it will figure out from the tempo of the file. So the file itself will need to have like metadata of the tempo, and then it will figure out from the tempo to whatever the current Cubase tempo is to play that file at the tempo. So let's say if I'm here now, an easy way of doing this is just to kind of come over. Let's say we have different loops here, and if we enable this little mode here, it says align beats to project. So now when I play a loop, and I adjust my tempo down, and we go to play that loop again. So now when we play tempos, it's going to automatically match the tempo. So I'm going to drag this over, and now this file is set to musical mode. So we can often see what the tempo is, sometimes within the file name, sometimes not. But when we come here, we can see that once we've dragged or double clicked this file with this icon enabled, that places it in musical mode. So if we listen to this file not in musical mode, and so we can see that that's not going to align. So if we, let me just come over, adjust my click volume up here. All right, so I'll just take this volume down. So say we listen to it now with a click. So that's not aligned. But again, since we went into our loops and we told it to be with the project tempo, it's automatically going to enable musical mode. So now when you listen to it, so now that it's in musical mode, I can, if I wanted to copy this, all I'd have to do is if we go to the center, right center edge, I can now just drag that across. And now at this point, and now those events will automatically duplicate after each other. Now, if we have two events that are kind of spaced out like this, and we want those events to snap to each other, we could change the grid mode to events. So now these events will automatically just kind of, if they were not aligned to the grid, the events themselves will snap. So if I come over here and this is kind of in between, whatever I do, this event will kind of almost like a magnet just attach to that particular file there. So try those things. So musical mode will make the events line up on the grid, and then you could have different snap modes where you could snap to the events, or if you wanted to do like shuffle. So if this event was like a different color, I could just move this beyond, and those two events will kind of flip positions. So you could do stuff like that with some of the different snap modes. So let me know if that's helpful for you, an active user. All right, so Carlos says, if I want to detune only one note inside the chord, how can I apply these changes to all other instruments in that scale? Okay, so it's, All right, so I assume that this is going to be MIDI, but let me know if I'm making an incorrect assumption. All right, so I'm going to do this using Hallian. Now, a lot of instruments may not do this, and it's just a limitation of the instrument. But let's say I have this, and we will drag. I'll just add some chords. So I'll come here to the chord pads. Okay, so now we want to listen to this. All right, so let's say I want to take, let's do E flat note. Okay, so not all plugins have this capability, but if we come over here to the MIDI inserts, we could say, let's get to our Microtuner plugin. So I want to take the E flat and adjust the pitch on that. So let's say we're going to be in D sharp scale. So let's say I want to take this note and make it sharp for all the notes. So every time that there's, and I want to take F notes and make them flat. All right, so I don't want to record, but let's. So every single note we could just detune. Here, I'll just try even a different scale, maybe. So we might hear it a little more obviously here. Okay, so let's get to Microtuner plugin. So you could adjust here. Now also what you could do, so that's a good way of kind of doing it globally. Also with like Hallian, if you wanted to just double click on the note with like a Hallian based instrument or pad shop Retrologue, you could also come over here to note expression and say, okay, I want to do tuning. So this one particular note, I could just tune it sharp or flat as well. But check out the Microtuner plugin. And again, it's going to be, some of the instruments may not be able to play that. So. Okay. All right, so we see from All About Music, sometimes my projects open with a glitchy sound, audio tail / artifact. Can I ignore it? So often you can. It could be just like the buffers kind of working themselves out. So it could be a buffer. So, and once a buffer gets filled. All right, so we see a question from Darren Flake. who asks, sorry, Greg, the MIDI part was related to MIDI logical editor presets. My question, if we can automate the fine tune and transpose on a dynamic signal, that would be easier than loading a plugin. So if you want to do it for like an audio part, so let's say we want to take this particular, sorry. So if I want to take this guitar part, you know, if I wanted to take this part here, I could transpose. But let's say I wanted to do maybe, so let's say from that note here, I could also just select this particular region here. So it's, and then we could choose to do our fine tuning. So if we want to go, so this is tune, this is, we'll say 25 cents and 1 semitone. So no tuning here. We have this one transposed by semitone, and if you want to do it by cents, you could adjust right there by cents. So that way it'll do it all the time. So it's not necessarily so automatable, but you could, you know, select different sections, cut sections, and make changes here on tuning. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so we have a question from Mesabog2. Greg, is there a way to keep the edit channel window on top while adjusting controls in the main project window? Okay, so let's say we open up this control. I think if we right click on top, you could say always on top. So now I could come over here. So I'm going to activate always on top, and now I could come over here. I could go into the sample editor. I could make different sections. I could open a window. I can move events. So just try to right click over here and choose always on top. And without that, when I go to select something else, this window will get tucked behind. Once that window is set into always on top mode, then I could come over here, do editing, and this window will always remain fixed where it is. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, so we see from All About Music says, Greg, are you planning to have a specific stream on Retrologue / Pad Shop, etc., Greg? So, you know, whatever questions you have, we kind of go through, but I probably won't have a dedicated stream. But if you wanted to learn more about, especially Pad Shop, I think Gary Gibbons' videos from Online Music Foundry does like amazing presets for Pad Shop, and he's like a Pad Shop genius. I have so much respect for Gary, and the work he does is so great. So definitely check out some of his stuff if you want to get more into it. But other things that you have, you know, questions on, you know, feel free to ask. All right, inactive user asks, if I save a Cubase session with all VST3 plugins in the inserts and sends, etc., if I buy a new computer, reinstall all my VST3 plugins, will the Cubase sessions save all the plugin settings, etc.? So yeah, so as long as the plugins are there, it will call up the plugin. As long as the plugin is licensed, you know, and all the settings will be preserved for you. So no problems there. All right, so Tim K just says, says I had a similar thing to noises on startup. Sometimes I fixed it by turning off all MIDI for the device, as Greg showed us last week. Yeah, so sometimes if you're using a MIDI remote, like a MIDI controller, like many MIDI controllers will also, like, you know, if you're doing transports like stop, play, rewind, fast forward, that's basically like a, you know, you hit a button and you release the button. So often that's a MIDI note on, note off message that's triggering that. So if you're running into where you hit like a transport and it's playing an instrument sound unexpectedly, it's probably because if you have your MIDI input for a track set to in all MIDI inputs, you want to take your controller and have it not go into in all MIDI inputs. So you do that by going to your studio menu, to your studio setup, and we'll select MIDI port setup. So MIDI devices that are being used and functioning as controllers, just come right over here and uncheck in all MIDI inputs. And that way your controller will send MIDI information as a control surface and not as kind of a rogue MIDI controller playing random notes when you activate transport functions. All right, so we see Drums Clark just saying I just got in, so that's great. Just because you're late, you had to hit the like button, but thanks for joining us this evening or afternoon, wherever you're at, or morning. All right, so we see from All About Music, just says, this is such a vast ocean, lots more to learn. Thanks a lot, Greg, for imparting all this knowledge with us. So I'm just glad to be able to share knowledge. I think it's an important thing to do when you have knowledge. It's imperative for you to share it with others. See Best Green Jesus says, yeah, shout out to Gary Gibbons. Yeah, watch his stuff. It's just so magical how you know, I'm like, how are you going to make such an amazing sound from this sound? And he does. And it's just like, oh, blows me away every time. All right, so we see Fly V says he's off now to a shower and Friday night party. It's his birthday's coming up on August 29th. All right, well, we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful birthday celebration. We don't talk to you. And all right, I know we had some other questions that were mailed in. Let me get to those before we start running out of time. Bear with me just a second. All right, so we had a question, how to do custom chord voicings on chord pads. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so I want to select all the chord pads, and let me just we'll delete all of these. Okay, so if I want specific voicings, so let's say I play a C minor chord, just like a block chord, or I'm going to play C1, E flat 1, G1. Right, so I'm going to come over here, we'll select the pad, and then we could double click here, and let me just all right, and we see this little MIDI icon here, and we could assign for MIDI input. So I'm just going to play a block chord. So we can see the chord here, I'll release, and that's going to be the voicing for that particular chord. So if we come over, all right, so let's say I want to do a different chord. We'll come over here. So let's say I want to do maybe a G major chord, but a different voicing on it. So just come over here. Okay. So now I could play this C minor chord with a block voicing, or if I want to play a G major chord with different voicings, we could just come over here and set up your different chord voicing. So as we enable the MIDI input, I can just play the particular chords, and we could choose whether it is following. So there's, and we could also choose whether it does adaptive voicing or not. So at this point, we could just come over and define the chord by just playing the chord in right there, just like that. All right, next question. Is there a way to set a range for quick control knobs? For example, to express a cutoff filter with only 100 to 200 hertz on a soft synth by using 0 to 100% of a quick control knob. All right, so let's take a look. We'll come over to, let's add our instrument track. So let's say we'll do a Retrologue. Okay, so let's load up. All right, so I want, let's say, to control this filter. All right, so one of the things we can do is I'm going to go to my MIDI remote, and I'm going to have this go for a quick control knob. So let's say, let me see if I have one it's assigned. Okay, so what we want to do is, let's say I want to control this, but I don't want, and when we look at the parameters, I don't want, as I move the knob all the way over here. So let me just see if I could, I'll do a focus quick control slot here. So this will be bigger. All right, so I'm moving this quick control knob, and when we move it, I'm going for the full value of it. But if I wanted this to be only like, I want the full value but only within a specified range, what we could do is double click on the quick control, and I'm going to select the particular knob here. All right, let me just, oh, sorry, I have this to learn on. All right, and in this area, I'm going to just delete this particular mapping. Here, I'll just do a completely new mapping page. Okay. Okay, so I want this knob here to do my quick control. So we'll come over. Is there focus quick control? All right, and now what we have is the ability to set minimum and maximum. So when we play a particular note, I could say I want this to go between 20 and 60%. All right, let's see why we're not. So now when I adjust the parameters, we can just choose kind of the scaling. So I'm going to open up and close the plugin again. And then at this point, let me just make sure I have this set for the all right, we'll just do the default quick controls here, sorry. So now as I move the knob fully, So I look here, we can see the full range of the knob here, but the full range isn't reflected. So we look at here where we have between 40 and 80%, but here we're doing the full range of the knob. So again, just double click on the parameter and we'll open up the mapping assistant, and then you could set the range of the control. So we can do from 20 to 60% or whatever percent that you want, or if you wanted to invert that, we could do that as well. So you could just set the minimum and maximum. So this is the full range of the knob or fader. We'll only do between 20 and 60% of the parameter for the particular knob. Okay. All right, next question that was mailed in. Hi, Greg. Really hope you can help with this problem. When I have effects track in a project and then add new track, audio, instrument group, etc., the track automatically sends to all the effects tracks. Is there a setting to prevent this and have new tracks with empty send slots? All right. So let's take a look. I think there's a preference for this. So remove these tracks. So let's add an audio track. And then we're going to add an effects channel to the track. So say we want our reverb. All right, so now we do this. We go to send. So let's say we have our reverb turned on there. Now there is a preference. So let's say if I add 2 more audio tracks, a couple more audio tracks, when we go to open them, we can see that this send is automatically kind of applied to that particular track. Okay, so and that's what we want to stop with this. So I'll remove these tracks and let's go to the preferences. And let me just see if I can find it. Okay, so if you go to preferences to VST, you'll see connect sends automatically for each newly created channel. So I'm going to uncheck that preference, hit apply. And now when I add additional audio tracks, these tracks won't have the send connected automatically that this one does. So these are now don't have the send, but when that preference, again, so go to preferences to VST to connect sends automatically for each newly created channel. So turn that off, then I think you'll be all set. Okay, let me jump back to our live questions. We got through all the ones mailed in. See, Best Korean Jesus says he's learned a lot from Gary's tutorials. Yeah, thanks for posting them, Jazz Dude. All right, let's see if there's any more questions that pop in. All right, so I think we're at the end of questions. All right, so we have Darren Flake. Okay, so we see question, is there an easy way to add 808 modulation LFO to control the mod wheel for the 808 tail when playing it? So let me just... All right, let me just see if I have... We open up project here. All right, so let's say if we have all right, so let's go ahead and say we have okay, so let's say if we want to all right, so all right, so let's say if we want to come over, let's say to the I guess it might be under the amplifier, so let's activate the so if I just come over here, so I'm just going to use it as a quick control. So as we or let's come over here, let's say we want this for quick control. So you could kind of, let's say if we come over, let's say so I think if you activate, is it this control? Yeah, so once you go into modulation, so I think it's kind of going to be in this area over here. So let's say we can activate the so I think it's going to be kind of in this area. I could do some more kind of research on that, but let me just see if see if it's but yeah, so I think it's going to be in this area once you come over, but I could do some more research on that for Tuesday. Okay, All About Music says, one last question, Greg. Say I have 10 tracks. I want 3-second reverb for 5 tracks and 6-second reverb for rest of the 5. What's the best way? Okay, so let's come over here to New Project. All right, so I think the easy way is, let's say we have 10 audio tracks. I'm going to select the first 5. Then I'm going to add track, and we're going to say add effects channel to selected tracks. So let's say we want this to be our long reverb. And then I will select the next 6 tracks, and this will just automatically add this end. And we'll add effects channel to this, and we'll put it as kind of a smaller reverb. So now, as you go into the mix console, we'll come over to our sends. We can just have all those kind of automatically set up and do the routing. So again, select, right click, add effects channel to selected channels. All right, Tim K wants everyone to take what they've learned and get creative. All right, wonderful that Gerald Ely's made it. Thanks for joining us. As long as you hit the like button, you're all good. All right, we'll see if there's any other questions that sneak in. So once again, next 1 week from today, we will be doing our Zoom social meetup. So look forward to, and it's, if you're not familiar with that, if you haven't joined one, it's basically, we usually, the last live stream of the month, we go for about 2 hours, and then we will migrate over to a Zoom meeting so that everyone can meet and chat and get to know each other. I think it's always a wonderful thing to do. So, but we will be doing that starting next 1 week from today. There'll be some interesting news announced on Monday next week, so pay attention, read the Steinberg news. So there'll be some good announcements next week that will be coming. So pay attention with that. We'll mention on the live stream as we get closer and as some of the announcements are made. But we'll see if there's, again, any other questions that sneak in. All right, so I think we've gone through all the questions. I hope that everyone's learned a new tip or trick. And if you have, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, tell your friends about it, and hit the like button. All those things help. Enables us to kind of offer this to you without having ads every 30 seconds. So just, but I want to thank everyone for taking part of your morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, learning more about Steinberg products. And if we have, we look forward to seeing everyone back on Tuesday. And with that, I want to wish everyone a wonderful weekend and hope that everyone stays safe and healthy. And we'll see you on Tuesday. Thank you very much. Goodbye.